The galaxy bled. From the edge of the Eye of Terror to the cold, dead silence beyond the halo stars, the void was littered with the skeletal remains of empires. Once proud battle fleets drifted as shattered wreckage, their gilded hulls blackened by plasma fire. Planets hung broken in orbit, their surfaces scarred with the deep, scorched fissures of planetary bombardments. Above them all loomed the Blood Pact, the most fanatical of Chaos's mortal servants. Not as a thriving empire, but as a great beast wounded, its strength waning, yet its hunger undiminished. The banners of the Pact still flew crimson in the black winds of space, but they were tattered things now. Once they had been a terror that brought imperial worlds to their knees in the name of the Archon. Now their empire was stretched thin, like old iron ready to crack, and at its heart stood the War Master. He was a figure of contradictions, a warlord sworn to chaos, bound to immortal oaths, yet cursed with the memory of mortality. His flesh bore the scars of 100 campaigns. His eyes carried the weight of centuries of blood and ruin. The powers of the warp sustained him, but they did not grant him peace. No, immortality was no blessing. It was a chain that bound him to the unending wars, to betrayals that repeated themselves across centuries, to watching allies wither to dust or fall screaming into the eye. Tonight, aboard the warship Oathbreaker, he stood alone before the viewing deck, staring into the corpse light of a dying star. The crimson light spilled across his armor, making the blood-forged sigils blaze faintly, as though they lived and burned. Another sun dies, he thought, voice a low growl echoing in the silence of his mind. And still the galaxy turns without pause. He thought of the empire he had carved in the name of chaos undivided, of worlds burning as sacrifices, of skulls stacked high upon altars. He thought too of the cost, the oceans of blood that had bought each barren victory, and deep within an unease stirred. It was not doubt. He was far too deep into damnation for that. It was something colder. The faint whisper that perhaps the Blood Pact's destiny was not to conquer forever, but to fall as all empires did. He clenched his gauntleted hand until the brass creaked. Not yet. The whisper quieted, but it did not vanish. The Oathbreaker's deck vibrated faintly under his boots as the engines shifted. Reports from the lower decks came in hushed tones, unrest among the Pact's warbands, whispers of disloyalty, petty rivalries boiling into near mutiny. None dared voice these things in his presence, but he could smell the rot forming in the ranks. He turned away from the star. His reflection lingered faintly in the glass, helm tucked under one arm, pale, scarred face lit in the red glow. His eyes were dark, yet they burned. And then, for the first time in hours, his voice broke the silence. Soon, he murmured, a promise meant as much for himself as for the galaxy. The promise of fire, the promise of war. And you, yes, you who listen to this tale, know that these words are not just meant for his enemies, but for all who would stand witness. We tell this story not in haste, but because we truly care for you, who have joined us in these dark hours of remembrance. We want you to see the truth of what was, to understand why these names still carry weight in the void. Before we begin the long march of this tale, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now grab your coffee, settle into the stillness of the void, and let us begin. The first seeds of ruin were planted not by the guns of the Imperium, but by the Blood Pact themselves. In the days when their war hosts surged victorious across Segmentum Obscurus, there had been unity, a unity born of fear, bound in blood oaths. But victory bred ambition, ambition bred envy, and envy. Envy bred treachery. The War Master had seen it before, in the ancient campaigns on Bellis Corona, in the shifting loyalties during the Sabbat Crusade. Always it began the same way. Quiet words in the shadow of banners, secret meetings far from the command decks, the slow withdrawal of loyalty from the center to the edges. Even now, his mind turned to those who served closest to him. There was Vokar, High Captain of the Warbound, fearless, cunning, and loyal, or so he claimed. Yet his victories shone too brightly, his praises too loud. A man like that could not help but gather followers. There was Sarith, Prophet of Chains, the Pact's chief warseer. She spoke the words of the gods with a serpent's tongue, promising glory in exchange for obedience. And yet, the gods whispered to many, and their will was ever-changing. And there was Corin, the War Master's oldest companion, a man who had fought beside him in the first years of blood and conquest. But years and the promises of the dark gods changed men. The War Master's eyes narrowed. Each of them had ambition. Each of them could be a rival. The star before him flared briefly, as if in mockery of his thoughts, then dimmed further. A solar death throe. Below deck, the soldiers of the Pact sang their war songs, harsh, guttural chants that spoke of loyalty unto death. But the War Master heard the cracks in those songs, the absences where voices had been silenced, the notes that rang hollow. The Pact was not dying. Not yet. But it was shifting. And shifts like that always ended in blood. As the Oathbreaker drifted towards the warfront, the War Master turned away from the starfield. His next campaign would be against the Iron Fang Reavers, a splinter warband that had broken from the Pact's authority. It was a small rebellion, almost beneath his notice. Yet he knew such sparks, left unchecked, could ignite into wildfire. The corridors of the flagship echoed with the measured strike of his boots. War servitors and chaos-marked warriors stepped aside as he passed. His presence was a gravity, all eyes drawn, all words silenced. In the command deck, hololithic displays flickered with maps of contested systems. The Reavers had taken 3 worlds along the Aegis expanse. Reports suggested they had been aided, perhaps even supplied, by an unknown force. The War Master's gaze swept the chamber. Vokar stood at the tactical array, armor still marked with blood from his last campaign. Sarith lingered at the edge, chains and charms rattling faintly as she whispered half-prayers. Corin waited at the far side, his scarred hands resting on the hilt of his sword. They all bowed, as was custom. "My War Master," Vokar began, his voice smooth, measured. "The Reavers are a minor threat. Allow me to take my fleet and bring them to heel. You need not trouble yourself with such trivial enemies." The War Master studied him in silence. The offer was reasonable, but the eagerness, no. He would not send another to do his work. Not yet. "No," the War Master said at last. His voice was low, cold, carrying through the chamber like a blade. "I will lead this campaign. The Blood Pact answers to me. None will mistake my hand for weakness." A ripple of unease passed through the chamber, though none dared voice it. "Prepare the fleet," he ordered. "We make for the Aegis expanse at once." And as his lieutenants moved to obey, the War Master felt it again, that faint whisper of inevitability. The Blood Pact was not yet broken, but the cracks had begun to show. Far beyond, in the dying light of the crimson star, the void seemed to watch in silence. The Oathbreaker prowled the warp like a predator scenting prey. Its great, brass-armored hull groaned as the tides of unreality licked against its flanks, demon forms writhing in the half-glimpsed folds of impossible space. Geller wards, ancient and scarred, burned faintly to hold back the predatory touch of the immaterium. The Warmaster stood at the strategium's center, boots planted upon the engraved eight-pointed star, as if he could anchor the ship himself through sheer will. The crimson light of hololithic projectors played across his armor, painting him as the very image of the Blood Pact's brutal will. Around him, his lieutenants moved like orbiting worlds, each one drawn by gravity, yet each one possessing its own secret trajectory. Vokar spoke first, as always. "Our fleets are ready, my Warmaster. The Reavers hold 3 worlds in the expanse, all poorly fortified. A concentrated strike will shatter their defenses." He leaned over the tactical array, one gauntleted finger stabbing at glowing runes. "My proposal is simple. Split the fleet into 3 spearheads. Strike all worlds at once, swift, decisive, before they can consolidate." It was a plan drenched in boldness. Too much boldness. Before the Warmaster could respond, Sareth's laughter broke the silence. A sound like rusted chains dragged over stone. "So eager to scatter the Pact's strength, Vokar. Perhaps you think the Warmaster cannot see the wisdom in holding power together. Or perhaps you think to hold a world for yourself while the rest of the fleet burns elsewhere." Her voice was soft, but each word dripped venom. The room chilled. Vokar's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. "You speak of treachery too freely, Prophet. If you were not so valuable to the Pact's morale, I would—" "You would what?" Sareth purred. "Challenge me, or simply hope the Warmaster does not notice where your true loyalties lie." The Warmaster let them speak, his silence the weight beneath which they squirmed. Their rivalry was no secret. Vokar coveted command. Sareth coveted influence. Both fed on ambition as much as on blood. Corin, standing apart, finally broke the rising tension. His voice was low, weary. "Perhaps it would serve us all to remember the enemy lies beyond these walls. Reavers or not, we bleed Chaos's name before the galaxy. We cannot afford to turn the blade inward now." The Warmaster's gaze fell upon Corin, the one who had stood beside him since the first oath sworn in blood. The old warrior's eyes still held the loyalty that so many others only pretended at. Yet even that loyalty had been weathered by years of war. The Warmaster spoke at last, his voice cold iron. "The Pact will not scatter its strength. We will strike the first world together. Let the others see the fate of traitors before their eyes. The Reavers will burn, their banners torn down in the sight of their allies. Then," he turned to Vokar, "then we will take the others." There was no argument. His word was law. When the Oathbreaker burst from the warp into the Aegis expanse, the void burned crimson. The target world, Draxos 4, lay below, its surface shrouded in thick, ash-grey clouds. Ancient Manufactoria lay silent beneath those skies, their towering spires now fortresses for the Reavers. The planet's defense grid spat fire into the void, pale against the blackness. "Begin bombardment," the Warmaster ordered. The Blood Pact's fleet moved like a steel tide. Batteries roared, firestorms lanced downward, orbital stations shattered in blossom clouds of molten metal. Yet the Reavers fought with desperate ferocity. Their ships, crude and spiked with jagged armor, swarmed like wasps. Small victories were carved in blood. A Pact cruiser was gutted, its remains tumbling towards the planet's surface in a burning arc. On the Strategium, Vokar grinned like a predator. "They bleed, my Warmaster. One more push, and their fleet is ours." The Warmaster did not answer. His eyes were fixed on the hololith, seeing beyond the surface battle to the shape of the greater war. Something in the Reavers' defense felt orchestrated, too fierce for their numbers, too coordinated for a splinter force. He turned to Sarith. What do the gods whisper? Her pale lips curved into a smile that did not reach her eyes. The warp is restless. It is as though the very void is watching. There are threads here that do not belong to the Reavers alone. Someone has taken an interest in you, my War Master. That drew his attention like a blade drawn across armor. Another hand in play, a rival, or worse, a benefactor. He turned back to the array. Signal the fleets, press the attack, take Draxos 4. The landing was an act of brutality, as the Pact always preferred. Drop barges plunged through atmosphere, screaming on tongues of fire. Pact warriors poured from their holds, their armor painted red and black, their faces hidden behind the snarling masks of cornet devotion. The air itself seemed to tremble with the weight of their chants. The War Master strode among them as they advanced, his presence a living banner. He was more than commander. He was the embodiment of the Pact's oaths, the chain that bound every soldier to their cause. The fighting was vicious, street to street through the Manufactoria. Reaver warriors, clad in scavenged armor, fought like beasts cornered. Blood ran in rivers down rusted walkways, steaming where it struck molten metal. Vokar fought at the War Master's side, his twin axes carving crimson arcs. Corin cut a path with the precision of a man who had survived too many campaigns to waste a single strike. By dusk, the Reaver defenses had collapsed. Their warlord, a gaunt figure crowned in bone, was dragged before the War Master. The Reaver spat blood, laughing even in defeat. You think you've won? You've only broken the first chain. The rest will tighten around your throat. The War Master studied him in silence. Then, without a word, he drew his blade and severed the man's head. That night, as the Pact's banners were raised over the Manufactoria spires, the War Master stood apart from the victory feast. The air stank of blood and smoke. Corin approached, his armor blackened with ash. A clean victory, he said, though his tone was not celebratory. The War Master's gaze lingered on the burning horizon. No victory is clean. Corin hesitated, then spoke low. The Reaver's words. Do you think there's truth in them? That someone else is moving against us? The War Master's jaw tightened. He thought of the Reaver fleet's strange discipline, of Sarith's warning, of the restless whispers in the warp. Yes, he said at last, but truth in this galaxy is a blade with two edges. We will see soon enough which way it cuts. Above them, the ash clouds glowed faintly red, as though another sun was dying. The fires of Draxos 4 burned for 6 days before the Oathbreaker left orbit. From orbit, the planet's surface glowed faintly, like an ember that refused to die. The War Master had ordered no reconstruction, no occupation. The world was left as a message, a warning to all who dared fracture the Blood Pact. But victory had its own cost. The fleet's supply lines were stretched, several ships damaged beyond repair. More dangerous still was the silence in the Strategium. Where once there had been shouts of triumph, now there was a quiet, tense watchfulness. Every officer knew that the Reaver's final words, that another power watched the Pact, had sunk deep into the War Master's mind. Days later, in the Strategium, Vokar stood before the hololithic display of the Aegis expanse. His expression was carefully measured, but the faintest curl of satisfaction tugged at his lips. My War Master, he began, with Draxos 4 secured, the second world, Kirill's watch, lies open. Its defenses are weak. We should move quickly before any reinforcements arrive." The War Master said nothing, his gaze fixed on the shifting map. It was Corin who spoke from the shadows of the chamber. "You want to strike before the Pact can recover from the first battle? That is haste, Vokar, and haste cuts both ways." Sareth's laughter floated through the dim light. "Perhaps our High Captain seeks to prove himself again." She let her chains rattle faintly, the sound like a warning whispered by the gods. The warp stirs. To rush ahead would be to march into its teeth. Vokar's voice grew harder. "We cannot afford to sit idle. Each day we wait gives the Reavers time to rally, or worse, gives their unseen ally more time to prepare." His gaze slid toward the War Master. "We must act." The War Master turned slowly, the crimson glow of the hololith catching the edges of his armor. "Act, yes," he said. His voice was calm, but there was a weight in it that silenced the chamber. "But not in ignorance. We will not march blind into a snare. I will know who aids the Reavers before we move again." That night, in the great hall of the Oathbreaker, the War Master walked alone. The ship groaned around him, its machine spirit restless in the warp. Torchlight flickered along the brass walls, casting shadows like the bars of a cage. He passed the chambers of the warriors, places alive with chanting, the sound of blades being sharpened, oaths being sworn. The Blood Pact remained loyal, outwardly, but the War Master could feel it, the subtle shift in their songs, the glance of suspicion between officers. War made men hungry. Hunger bred ambition. In the deepest part of the ship lay the shrine to the Pact's founding oaths. Here, beneath a great banner, blackened with the smoke of 100 campaigns, the War Master stood in silence. He remembered the first oath, the blood spilled, the names sworn to chaos. He remembered the faces of those who had stood with him that day. Most were gone now. Only Corin remained. It was Corin who came to him in the shrine, his boots echoing softly. "My War Master," he said, bowing his head. "The fleet waits for your word." But he hesitated. There are whispers from the lower decks, a name spoken quietly. The War Master's eyes narrowed. "Speak it." "A name from before the Pact's rise," Corin said. "A name thought buried. It seems the Jackal of Lorn is alive." The War Master's grip tightened on the edge of the altar. The Jackal. Once, long ago, the Jackal of Lorn had fought beside the Pact, a commander of unmatched cunning, whose loyalty had always been conditional. When the Pact had taken the Aegis Expanse the first time, the Jackal had vanished with half a fleet. Now his name returned. And the War Master ordered the fleet to hold position near the shadow of Kirill's watch. Patrol ships scouted the system, but none found the Jackal. It was on the 6th day that the Oathbreaker's augurs detected a lone vessel emerging from the warp. It bore no banners, no known transponder codes. The ship did not flee. It did not fire. It approached the Pact's flagship at a steady, deliberate pace. The War Master ordered it brought into Docking Bay 13. The bay was lit dimly, the air thick with the scent of machine oil and incense. The vessel's ramp lowered slowly, and from the shadows stepped a figure clad in deep crimson armor, its edges lined with gold. His helm was tucked under his arm, revealing a lean, scarred face, with a smile that did not touch his eyes. "My War Master," the Jackal said, bowing with a mocking flourish. "It has been far too long." The War Master did not move. His hand rested lightly on the hilt of his blade. I had heard you were dead. The jackal's grin widened. Many have heard that. Many wanted it to be true. His gaze swept the bay, lingering on the packed warriors gathered there. But death is selective, as you well know. Behind the jackal stood a small retinue, warriors armored in crimson and black, their weapons worn but well maintained. Their presence was calm, disciplined, not like the usual rabble of renegades. "What do you want?" the War Master asked. The jackal spread his hands. "What I have always wanted, survival, and perhaps the chance to help my old comrades survive as well. I know who aids the Reavers." The silence in the bay deepened. "Speak," the War Master said. The jackal's smile turned cold. "Not here. The walls have ears, even aboard your ship. But I will tell you this. The Reavers are not your true enemy. They are the blade, the hand that holds them." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Is a name you once trusted." The War Master's eyes darkened. He did not believe in coincidence. "Then you will speak in the strategium," he said, "and you will name them." The jackal inclined his head. "As you wish, my War Master." As the two men walked toward the upper decks, the War Master could feel the weight of eyes on them. Vakar's suspicion, Sareth's quiet smile. In the void beyond, Kyrill's watch turned slowly, its surface glinting faintly in the dying light. The strategium of the Oathbreaker was a cathedral of war. Brass pillars rose like the ribs of some great beast, the walls carved with the names of worlds taken in blood. The hololithic map glowed dimly in the center, casting shifting red light that turned every shadow into something alive. The jackal stood at its edge, hands clasped loosely behind his back, his smile as sharp as a blade sheathed in silk. Around him, the War Master's inner circle gathered. Vokar stood stiffly, jaw tight, every inch of him radiating suspicion. Sareth lingered in the half-light, her chains whispering softly, her pale eyes gleaming as if she already knew what the jackal would say. Corrin remained close to the War Master, silent, his expression unreadable. The War Master's voice cut through the tension. "Speak. Name the hand behind the Reavers." The jackal inclined his head in a slow bow. "Of course." He stepped to the hololith, fingers dancing across the controls. The map shifted, the Aegis expanse dissolving into a wider view of contested sectors. A crimson mark pulsed faintly at the edge. "This," the jackal said, his voice calm, "is not merely a splinter rebellion. The Reavers are a tool, supplied, guided, and promised spoils by one who has reason to see the Blood Pact. Trimmed." He pressed another rune. The crimson mark expanded, revealing a symbol half hidden in the shifting light. A war sigil, not of the Imperium, not of the Reavers. It was a sigil the War Master knew. Slowly, his gaze shifted to Vokar. The High Captain's eyes widened. "You dare!" he snarled at the jackal. "This is a fabrication, a trick from a man who fled the pack decades ago." The jackal's grin widened fractionally. "And yet, the Reavers use your battle tactics. They fight with a discipline they never possessed before. Their supply lines," he let the words hang, "remarkably similar to yours." Vokar's hand went to his axe, the steel whispering from its bindings. Sareth's laughter coiled through the chamber, soft and poisonous. "How interesting. Our bold High Captain, so eager to scatter the fleet before the Reavers fell, so eager to be far from the War Master's gaze." "Enough!" The War Master's voice cracked like a whip. The chamber fell silent. Vakar's breathing was heavy, but he stepped back, his axe lowering reluctantly. His eyes, however, burned, not with fear, but with insult. The Warmaster's gaze moved from one face to another. I do not deal in accusations. I deal in proof. If the Jackal has such proof, he will bring it forward. Until then, Vokar remains High Captain. The Jackal bowed his head slightly, as if in respect. Then I will bring you proof, my War Master. But I warn you, the hand that feeds the Reavers is closer than you think. When the council dispersed, the War Master lingered. The strategium felt colder, the red light dimmer. His thoughts were a blade turning in the dark. If the Jackal lied, then he sought to fracture the pact for his own gain. If he spoke truth, then Vokar's ambition had already crossed into treachery. Either way, trust had thinned to a hair's breadth. That night, in the shrine to the Pact's oaths, Sarith approached the War Master. Her voice was soft, the rattle of her chains a counterpoint to her words. You see it now, don't you? The cracks. They widen. The War Master did not look at her. I have always seen them. She stepped closer, her eyes bright in the dim light. The Jackal is dangerous, but so is Vokar. One is a serpent, the other a wolf. Which will you chain? Which will you kill? The War Master's voice was iron. Whichever strikes first. Sareth's smile curved like a knife. The gods favor decisive hands, War Master. Do not let the moment pass. Her chains whispered as she withdrew, her laughter echoing faintly in the hall. In the days that followed, the fleet held position near Chiral's watch. No orders were given to strike. The warriors grew restless. Whispers spread through the lower decks that the War Master hesitated, that the gods were displeased. Vokar drilled his warriors ceaselessly, his loyalty outwardly unshaken, but his pride wounded. Corrin remained by the War Master's side, speaking little. The Jackal moved quietly among the crew, his words carefully chosen, sowing doubt in measured doses. And then came the first blow. It began in the lower hangar bays with a sudden explosion that tore through a munitions stockpile. Dozens of Pact warriors were killed instantly, hundreds more injured. The fire took hours to control. When the investigation began, the evidence pointed to sabotage. Fragments of a detonator traced back to a Reaver make, smuggled aboard weeks ago. But the Jackal was the one who brought another piece of evidence to the War Master, a shipment record signed under Vokar's authority. The War Master stared at the record in silence, the weight of it heavy in his gauntleted hand. That evening, the War Master summoned Vokar to the strategium. The High Captain entered, armor still scorched from drilling, his expression defiant. You called for me, my War Master. The War Master's gaze was steady. A munitions bay was destroyed. Sabotage. The detonator was of Reaver origin, and the shipment that brought it aboard bore your seal. Skar's face twisted. This is a trick, a Hamisit Vani. The Jackal seeks to. The Jackal did not sign your seal. The War Master cut him off. His voice was calm, but each word carried the weight of a falling blade. Vokar's mouth opened, but no words came. His jaw clenched, his hand curling into a fist. I will not condemn, Captain, on words alone, the War Master said. But know this, the next blow, the next whisper of betrayal, and I will cut it from the heart of the Pact myself. Vokar's breath was slow, controlled. He bowed stiffly. As you command, my War Master. He turned and left, but his eyes burned as he did. When he was gone, Corrin stepped from the shadows. You spared him. The War Master's gaze remained on the hololith. For now, a wolf shows its teeth only when cornered. I will see if Vokar bites. Corin nodded once. And if he does? The War Master's voice was quiet. Then the pact will bleed, and I will decide who survives the cut. Outside, beyond the armor of the Oathbreaker, Kirill's watch glimmered faintly in the void, patient, waiting, as if it knew the storm was coming. The Oathbreaker was restless. It was not the hum of the engines, nor the endless groan of the Geller wards. This restlessness was human. The unease of thousands of warriors sensing that something had shifted. The silence between orders was too long, the whispers too sharp. The War Master felt it like a pressure in the air. He moved through the corridors in silence, the echoes of his boots the only sound. His presence turned the mutters of warriors into silence, but silence did not erase doubt. At the shrine deck, he paused. The great banner of the pact hung there, its once brilliant crimson darkened to the color of old blood. Each campaign's seal hung from its edges. Every victory, every slaughter, every oath, but oaths frayed, always. That night, a council was called. The War Master's inner circle gathered once more in the strategium. Vokar stood stiffly, his pride held together by sheer force of will. Sareth leaned in the shadows, her chains whispering like serpents. The jackal was at ease, as if he already knew how the evening would unfold. Corin took his place at the War Master's side, as he had for decades. The War Master's voice was steady, cold. The Reavers hold their remaining worlds. We strike Kirill's watch next. His gaze moved deliberately from one face to another. There will be no division. The pact moves as one. A murmur rippled faintly through the chamber. Vokar stepped forward. My War Master, the fleet is restless. Your patience is testing loyalty. We are warriors, not sentinels. We must act before the pact begins to question. You speak as though they are not already questioning. Sareth cut in smoothly. The War Master's hand rose, silencing them both. Enough, we move tomorrow. The council ended, but the unease remained. That night, the attempt came. The War Master's private quarters were silent, save for the faint hum of the ship's heart. His armor stood in its rack, his weapons laid neatly beside it. He slept lightly, as he always had. The sound that woke him was not loud. A faint hiss, the whisper of metal, sliding across metal. His eyes opened. In the darkness, a figure moved, shadow within shadow, its blade catching the faintest glint of light. The War Master moved faster than thought. His hand closed around the hilt of his sidearm, the blade flashing upward in a lethal arc. Steel met steel in a sharp ring. The assassin was quick, their armor dark, unmarked. No banners, no insignia. Their strike was precise, aimed not at the War Master's heart, but at his throat. He caught the blade on the guard of his weapon, twisting, his strength overwhelming. The assassin slipped back, fluid, already reaching for a second blade. The War Master lunged. His strike was like a hammer. The assassin barely dodged, but the blow shattered part of their arm plate. A hiss escaped them, whether of pain or frustration he could not tell. They darted toward the exit. The War Master threw his blade. It struck the doorframe, burying deep. The assassin vanished into the shadows of the corridor beyond. The War Master summoned Corin at once. The old warrior arrived within minutes, his expression dark. They knew the way to your chambers, Corin said grimly. That is no common rebel, that is someone with access. The War Master's jaw tightened. I know. He thought of Vokar's rising defiance, of Sareth's whispered provocations, of the jackal's quiet smile. The jackal arrived moments later, as if summoned by the scent of danger. My War Master, he said, his voice smooth. "I heard there was an incident." "You hear much," the War Master said coldly. The Jackal's smile thinned. "That is why I am still alive. But perhaps now you see. The hand that guides the Reavers has reached into your very chambers." Corin's gaze flicked to the Jackal, suspicion in his eyes. "And yet, you appear at the perfect moment." The Jackal spread his hands. "Perhaps because I am trying to keep the pact from tearing itself apart." The War Master's eyes narrowed. "Or perhaps you are helping it along." The silence stretched like a drawn blade. The next day, the War Master stood before the assembled captains of the fleet. His armor was fully donned, the marks of the assassination attempt still faintly visible on the gorget at his throat. He spoke with iron certainty. "An attempt has been made on my life. This is not the act of a desperate enemy. This is the act of a traitor among us." A ripple of unease passed through the ranks. "The pact will not fracture," the War Master continued. "We will strike Kyrill's watch at dawn, and when we do, the traitor will reveal themselves." His voice was cold, final. "And when they do, I will kill them myself." The captains bowed their heads. None spoke. That night, alone in the shrine, the War Master stood before the banner once more. His reflection stared back at him from the brass fittings, the crimson light of the warp beyond the viewports, casting his armor in the color of blood. In the silence, the whisper returned, not the voice of any man, but the faint echo of inevitability. Empires do not die in battle. They die in silence from within. Outside, in the void, Kyrill's watch turned slowly, patient, waiting, its lights glimmering faintly like the eyes of a predator. The fleet of the Blood Pact broke from the warp, like a scar across the void. Before them hung Kyrill's watch, a fortress world wreathed in black clouds, its surface lit with the glow of Manufactoria forges. Massive defense platforms circled the planet like chained beasts, their weapon arrays already turning toward the Pact's ships. The War Master stood on the Oathbreaker's command dais, his voice carrying across the Vox. "All ships, form the spearhead. We cut through their defenses, then strike at the heart. No mercy, no retreat." The order thundered through the fleet. Engines roared. Macro batteries opened fire, their barrages rending the void in storms of fire. Pact warships surged forward in a tide of brass and crimson, their hulls drinking the light of explosions. The battle had begun. Kyrill's watch answered with fury. Orbital platforms unleashed storm after storm of fire, each strike tearing great wounds in the void. Flak bursts and lance beams flashed across the Pact's hulls. One cruiser, the Blood Tide, was split in half by a defense platform's concentrated salvo, its burning wreckage tumbling toward the planet's surface. "Bring the Oathbreaker forward," the War Master ordered, his voice steady despite the maelstrom. Vokar, at the tactical array, moved with mechanical precision, issuing firing orders and formation shifts. Yet there was a tightness in his voice, a coiled tension that had not gone unnoticed. Corin stood beside the War Master, his gaze moving between the battle and the men on the bridge. It was then the first rupture appeared. A Pact destroyer, the Vile Oath, suddenly broke formation. Without warning, it swung its guns toward the Pact's own flank, its lances firing into the side of the Blackmoor, another Pact vessel. The Blackmoor reeled, its shields buckling under the sudden betrayal. The bridge of the Oathbreaker erupted in shouts. "Traitor fire!" Vokar snarled, slamming commands into the array. "Signal the Vile Oath to stand down." "It will not," the Jackal said quietly from the shadows, his smile thin. The Warmaster's voice cut through the chaos. Destroy it. Macro batteries from nearby pack ships turned on the vile oath. In moments, the destroyer was torn apart, its wreckage spinning into the void. But the damage was done. The formation wavered. Confusion rippled through the fleet. Sabotage within the fleet, Corrin said grimly. The Warmaster's eyes narrowed. This is the traitor's work. They move now, when blood runs hottest. He turned to Vokar. Hold the formation. Drive through the defenses. We take the planet. Vokar hesitated, just a heartbeat, but enough for the Warmaster to notice. Then he bowed his head sharply. As you command, my Warmaster. The Oathbreaker pushed through the defenses, its guns roaring. One by one, the orbital platforms fell silent, broken under the fleet's concentrated fire. Drop barges launched in waves, streaming toward the planet's surface. The Warmaster descended with the first wave. Jashkiral's watch was a furnace world, its air heavy with the stench of ash and metal. The sky burned crimson as the Pact's forces landed in the Manufactoria plains. The Warmaster strode at the head of his warriors, his blade cutting down the Reaver defenders with merciless precision. Around him, the chants of the Pact rose, their voices a storm of devotion. But even on the ground, betrayal stalked them. In the midst of the advance, a squad of Pact warriors suddenly turned their weapons on their own ranks. Bolter fire tore into Pact lines, warriors falling before they realized the shots came from behind. Corrin's voice roared over the din. Traitors in the ranks, hold the line. The Warmaster turned, cutting down one of the renegades with a single brutal strike. His voice thundered. No quarter, kill them all. The rebellion was swift, bloody, and crushed in minutes. But the Warmaster's mind was no longer on the battle. This was no random treachery. This was a coordinated strike. Someone had placed these traitors where they could do the most damage, and timed their betrayal with the fleet's assault. By dusk, the Reaver defenses had shattered. The Warmaster stood on the highest platform of the Manufactoria fortress, looking down at the burning plains. Pact banners were being raised. The Reaver, dead, left unburied in the ash. Corrin approached, his armor scorched, his expression grim. Another victory, but it tastes wrong. The Warmaster's gaze stayed on the horizon, because this was not only a battle, it was a message. Corrin frowned. From the traitor. The Warmaster nodded. They wanted me to know they are here, that they move freely. They think I will turn my blade inward before the Pact strikes again. The Jackal joined them then, his smile faint. And will you, my Warmaster? The Warmaster turned his head slightly. Perhaps, or perhaps I will let them think they are winning. Let them believe their hand is hidden. The Jackal's eyes glinted. A dangerous game. The Warmaster's voice was cold. So is war. Above them, the sky darkened as the ash clouds thickened, like a shroud settling over the world. All right, I'll write Chapter 7 in full, keeping the tension sharp but slow burning. This chapter will follow the Warmaster as he begins his covert countermove against the traitor, while the Blood Pact faces the arrival of a new, greater threat from beyond the Aegis expanse. Word count will stay in the 1,200 to 1,500 range. The Oathbreaker sailed in silence. Kirill's watch burned behind them, its forges broken, its skies blackened. Another victory for the Blood Pact, another scar on the Warmaster's soul. Yet the fleet did not sing. No chants filled the void. There was only the hollow sound of engines and the weight of eyes that did not trust the shadows. The Warmaster stood alone in the strategium. The hololithic map of the Aegis expanse rotated slowly before him, but his thoughts were far from the glowing stars. The traitor had shown their hand at Chiral's watch. Not enough to be caught, just enough to wound. They were growing bold. Corrin entered quietly, his boots heavy on the brass floor. "My Warmaster," he said, bowing his head. "Repairs continue. The Black Moor will be battle-ready within 3 days. The crews are restless. They will be more than restless soon," the Warmaster said, his voice low. "The traitor's hand has not yet finished its work." Corrin's gaze narrowed. "You mean to strike back?" "I mean to hunt," the Warmaster said. His eyes shifted to the hololith. "But I will not do it in the open. They expect me to turn my blade inward. I will let them think I hesitate, and in that hesitation, I will see them reveal themselves." Corrin nodded once. "And if they do not," the Warmaster's voice was iron, "then I will force them to." In the lower decks of the Oathbreaker, the Jackal moved quietly. He spoke to no one directly, but his presence was felt. A word here, a suggestion there. The Pact's warriors had begun to repeat his phrases without realizing it. Doubt moved like a sickness through the ranks. Sareth, too, wove her whispers, her chains rattling faintly as she passed through the halls. She spoke of omens, of signs in the warp that the Pact's heart was unsteady. Her words were like a slow poison, seeping into the cracks the traitor had already opened. The Warmaster called Vokar to the strategium. The High Captain entered in full armor, his expression guarded. "You have been quiet," the Warmaster said. Vokar inclined his head. "I speak when I am needed, my Warmaster." "Silence can be as loud as words," the Warmaster replied. "At Chiral's watch, you hesitated. At Draxos 4, you pressed too quickly. Do you think I do not see the pattern?" Vokar's jaw tightened. "I am loyal to the Pact. I have bled for it. I will bleed again." The Warmaster's eyes were cold. "Perhaps you will." 2 days later, the threat revealed itself. The Oathbreaker's augurs detected movement beyond the expanse, a cluster of ships larger than any Reaver fleet. Their hulls bore no Reaver markings, no Imperial banners. The Jackal stood at the hololith, his expression unreadable. Not the Imperium, not the Reavers. A third hand, perhaps. The Warmaster's gaze darkened. Or the same hand, wearing a different face. Corrin studied the readings. Their course will take them straight to the Pact's route. They know where we are. This is no accident. The Warmaster called the fleet to readiness. As the Pact prepared for battle, the Warmaster moved quietly. Orders were given to the loyal captains, those whose oaths he had tested in silence. Certain signals were withheld from others. Certain orders were delayed, redirected, misdirected. He was building a net, and the traitor was the prey. The enemy fleet emerged from the warp like a blade drawn from shadow. They were sleek, their hulls marked with symbols long thought lost. Their ships moved in perfect formation, a precision that spoke of discipline far greater than the Reavers. The Jackal's smile was faint. "Ah, so they show themselves at last." Corrin's voice was low. "You know them." The Jackal said nothing, but the Warmaster could see the recognition in his eyes. The battle began in the void. Enemy fire tore into the Pact's outer ships. One Pact frigate exploded in a plume of fire. Another veered off course, its engines crippled. The Warmaster gave no signal for retreat. "Hold formation," he ordered. His voice was calm, measured. The Oathbreaker's guns roared, its batteries cutting into the enemy line. It was in the chaos of the fight that the traitor moved again. A signal was intercepted, an encrypted transmission sent from within the Oathbreaker itself to the enemy fleet. The source, Vokar's command deck. Corrin's voice thundered over the comm. Vokar's ship is signaling the enemy. The War Master's jaw clenched. Then the game ends now. He turned to the Jackal, cut the channel, lock his ship from command, and prepare boarding parties. The Jackal's grin widened. With pleasure. The Oathbreaker surged forward, leading the charge into the heart of the enemy fleet. But the true battle was no longer just in the void. The War Master had set his trap, and Vokar had stepped into it. The void burned. Enemy fire tore through the Pact's lines, but the War Master's gaze was locked on one target alone, the Iron Talon, Vokar's command ship. Through the Oathbreaker's viewing screens, the Iron Talon loomed in the void, its hull blackened with decades of war. Now its guns spat fire at the Pact's enemies, but its signals told another story. Signals meant to bleed the Pact, signals meant to feed the foe. The War Master's voice was iron. Prepare boarding parties. Corrin's head snapped toward him. You mean to go yourself? I mean to end this myself, the War Master replied. His eyes did not leave the Iron Talon. This treachery ends today. The Jackal's smile was faint, almost admiring. A bold move, in my War Master, but boldness draws blood. Be certain it is theirs, not yours. The War Master's gaze was cold. I am always certain. The Oathbreaker drove hard toward the Iron Talon. Its forward batteries cut down enemy escorts, the path opening like a wound in the void. As the boarding barges launched, the War Master stood at the head of the first. His armor gleamed like blood under the light of the embarkation deck. Around him, the elite warriors of the Pact stood ready, their oaths carved into their armor, their weapons humming with hunger. The barge shook violently as it cut through void fire, but the War Master stood unmoving, his hand wrapped around the hilt of his blade. This was not just a battle. This was judgment. So the boarding clamps hit the Iron Talon's hull with a shuddering impact. The doors blew open in a storm of fire and steel. Pack warriors surged forward, their war cries filling the darkened corridors. Resistance was immediate. Vokar's personal guard met them in the halls, their armor marked with the sigil of the High Captain. Steel clashed with steel. Bolter fire roared in the confined spaces. The air was thick with the stench of promethium and blood. The War Master cut through the melee like a force of nature. His blade tore through guard after guard, his every strike deliberate, measured, inevitable. He did not slow. He did not falter. He was here for one man. At last, the doors to the command deck loomed ahead. They were sealed, but not strong enough to hold. With a single command, melter charges were set. The blast tore the doors inward, heat flooding the chamber. Inside, Vokar stood at the command throne, his axe in hand, his armor scorched from battle. Around him, his officers turned their weapons toward the War Master, but their faces betrayed uncertainty. The War Master stepped into the chamber, the air heavy with tension. Vokar. The High Captain's voice was sharp, defiant. My War Master. You have sent signals to the enemy, the War Master said. His voice was calm, but there was a weight in it, like a blade resting on a throat. Vokar's jaw tightened. I sent what was necessary. What was necessary? The War Master repeated slowly. To betray the Pact. To save it, Vokar roared, stepping forward. You hesitate. You watch as the Pact rots from within. I will not see it die while you play at patience." The chamber went still. Even the sound of the battle beyond the hull seemed to fade. The War Master's gaze was unblinking. "You would save the pact by tearing it apart." Vokar's grip tightened on his axe. "Better to tear it apart and rebuild it than watch it decay under your watch." The War Master's voice was quiet now, but the edge in it was sharper than any blade. "You speak like a man who has already chosen his side." Vokar's eyes burned. "I have." The two warriors stood in silence for a heartbeat. Then Vokar charged. His axe came down in a strike meant to kill. The War Master's blade met it with a thunderous crash. Sparks lit the chamber. The duel began. Vokar fought with fury, each strike heavy, driven by years of loyalty turned to anger. The War Master's style was precise, unrelenting. Every block a counter, every step forward driving Vokar back. Their blades rang like war drums, echoing in the command deck. The guards dared not interfere. This was more than combat. This was judgment. At last, the War Master caught Vokar's axe on the lock of his blade, twisting hard. The weapon tore from Vokar's grasp, clattering to the deck. The War Master's blade came to rest at the High Captain's throat. "You could have been my brother," the War Master said, his voice low. Vokar's breath was ragged. "I was, until you made me your enemy." For a moment, the War Master said nothing. Then his blade shifted. The chamber was silent, save for the sound of steel cutting through the air. Outside the command deck, the Iron Talon shuddered as its guns fell silent. On the Oathbreaker, the fleet's Vox crackled to life. The War Master's voice filled every channel. "The traitor is dead. The pact endures. All ships, press the attack." But in the quiet of the command deck, the War Master stood alone over Vokar's fallen form. The High Captain's last words still echoed in his mind. "Until you made me your enemy." And in the silence, the War Master knew this was not the end. This was only the first cut. The Iron Talon burned, its guns lay silent, its command deck stripped of power. The battle in the void still raged, but within the Pact's fleet, the greater storm was not made of fire. It was made of whispers. The War Master returned to the Oathbreaker without ceremony. Vokar's body was left aboard the crippled Iron Talon, its husk drifting like a broken blade. No proclamation was made, no mourning rites. The death of a High Captain did not end suspicion, it sharpened it. In the Strategium, the fleet captains gathered. Their eyes followed the War Master as he took his place at the dais. There was no defiance in their stance, but neither was there the unity of old. "The traitor is dead," the War Master said, his voice level. "The pact stands. The enemy fleet retreats." A murmur passed through the chamber. One captain, Karos of the Blood Tide's Wrath, stepped forward. "With respect, my War Master. One traitor. But how many more?" The War Master's gaze did not shift. "Those who remain will show themselves. And when they do, they will die, as Vokar did." The jackal leaned lazily against the wall, his smile faint. "Of course, if there are more." Karos's eyes narrowed at him. "You speak as though you know something, jackal." The jackal's smile only deepened. "I speak as though I always know something." The War Master's voice cut through the rising tension. "Enough. We will resume course to the expanse. The pact does not linger over its wounds. It strikes before they fester." But in the silence that followed, the War Master knew the wound had already begun to bleed. That night, in the shrine deck, the banners of the pact swayed in the recycled air. The seals of victory hung heavy, but their weight felt different now, as if they were shackles, not honors. Corin approached quietly. His armor was scorched, his face drawn. "You killed Vokar," he said, his voice low. The Warmaster did not turn. "I killed a traitor." Corin's jaw tightened, and now half the fleet wonders if you will call them traitor next. The Warmaster's eyes moved to the banners. Perhaps they should wonder. Corin hesitated. If they do, they will move. And if they move, we will have more than one Voskar. The Warmaster finally turned, his gaze steady. Then we will kill them all, and the pact will endure. Corin said nothing, but his silence was heavy. In the lower decks, Sarith moved like smoke. Her chains rattled faintly as she passed through the shadows, her whispers fanning the embers of unrest. "They kill their own now," she murmured to warriors in the dark. "First Vokar, then who?" Her words were not commands. They were questions. Questions that burned hotter than orders. And in her silence, the traitor's work deepened. 3 days later, the fleet moved deeper into the expanse. The enemy ships had vanished, retreating into the void, but their absence was not comfort. It was the quiet before another strike. The Oathbreaker's augurs began to detect anomalies, faint warp echoes, signals that came and vanished like ghosts. Corin studied the readings. Could be a damaged fleet. The Jackal's tone was too smooth. Or a hunting pack, watching, waiting. The Warmaster's gaze did not leave the readings, or a signal to draw us into another trap. That night, the Warmaster retired to his chambers. He removed his armor piece by piece, each plate set on the stand. The weight of the wars hung heavier than the metal. As he reached for the last clasp, the lights in the chamber flickered. The ship's hum faltered for just a moment, a breath of silence where there should have been sound. Then the walls shuddered. A muffled explosion echoed through the decks, followed by the blare of alarms. The Warmaster reached for his weapon as the Vox came alive with shouts. Deck 9 breached. Fire in the engine housing. Multiple impacts. Internal origin. The Warmaster's voice cut through the noise. Report. Corin's voice came back, harsh with urgency. It's sabotage, my Warmaster. Charges planted inside the Oathbreaker itself. The Warmaster moved toward the Strategium, the deck trembling beneath his boots. This was not a fleet attack. This was precise, internal. The traitor had moved again, not to wound a single ship this time, but to cripple the heart of the pact. And as the Oathbreaker shook, the Warmaster knew the enemy was no longer content with whispers and shadows. They were ready to strike openly. The Oathbreaker was on fire. The smell of scorched metal and burning oil filled the air as the ship's alarms wailed through every deck. Thick smoke curled along the corridors, each turn marked by the sound of distant explosions. The Warmaster moved quickly, his armor resealed, his blade in hand. He did not run, he advanced, each step measured, controlled. A commander who did not show fear, but he could feel it, the pulse of chaos in the ship's heart. This was no random sabotage. This was coordinated, aimed with precision to cripple the Oathbreaker at its core. Corin met him at the intersection of Deck 9. His armor was blackened by smoke, his breath harsh through his helm filters. "My Warmaster," he said urgently. "3 of the engine couplings are gone. Damage control is holding the 4th, but if the fire spreads, it won't," the Warmaster said. His voice was steel. "Seal the lower access decks. No one in or out. This is not an accident, it's a strike." Corrin's hand tightened on his weapon. "You think the traitor is aboard?" "I know they are," the War Master said. His eyes burned in the dim light. "And they are close enough to feel my breath." The two moved deeper into the smoke-filled corridors. Crew scrambled around them, dragging fire suppressants, sealing bulkheads, hauling the wounded. The War Master's presence silenced panic, but he could see it in their eyes. Fear. Fear of the enemy. Fear of each other. At the engine housing, the damage was worse. The great plasma conduits pulsed erratically, arcs of raw energy snapping against the scorched metal walls. The roar of fire drowned out all but the loudest commands. Zareth was there, her chains blackened, her eyes lit with the strange glow of the warp fire. "My War Master," she said, her voice like silk, even here. "The flames are persistent." The War Master's gaze narrowed. Persistent or guided? Zareth tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "Does it matter? Either way, they will consume us if left untended." Corrin stepped forward, suspicion flashing in his eyes, but the War Master raised a hand. "Help seal the breach," the War Master ordered. His tone was final, for now. Then the blow came. The Oathbreaker shook violently, not from the engines, but from a detonation somewhere deeper in its decks. The Vox crackled with urgent voices. "Bridge reports, Deck 3 breached, boarding parties incoming." Corrin's head snapped up. "Reavers? No. No ships are close enough to launch." The War Master's voice was cold. "They are not Reavers. They are already aboard." The attack came fast. Warriors in unmarked armor burst through the breach points, their weapons already hot. They struck with precision, targeting key systems, weapons control, communications, command decks. The War Master and Corrin moved to intercept. The corridors became killing grounds. Bolter fire ripped through the smoke. Steel clashed with steel. Pact warriors fought in the narrow spaces, their oaths clashing against the silent ferocity of the attackers. The War Master was at the center of it, his blade cutting through the enemy like a crimson storm. He recognized their style, not Reaver, not Imperial. This was someone else, someone trained to kill without banner or creed, and someone who had been guided directly to the Oathbreaker's heart. Midway through the battle, the lights flickered again. For a brief moment, the ship's power died, and in the darkness, the War Master felt it. A presence, close, watching. The traitor was here. When the lights flared back, the attackers were retreating. Not routed, not broken, but withdrawing in perfect order, leaving fire and confusion in their wake. The War Master advanced, cutting down the last of them as they fell back toward the breach. But before he could follow, Corrin caught his arm. "My War Master, the fire in the engines spreads. If we don't act now, the ship will be lost." The War Master's jaw tightened. His eyes moved toward the direction the attackers had fled. To chase them would mean leaving the Oathbreaker to burn. To save the ship would mean letting the traitor vanish again into shadow. The decision hung before him like a blade over his throat. The ship trembled again, alarms blaring louder. The traitor's voice, not spoken but felt in the chaos, whispered like the hiss of a blade being drawn. "Choose." The War Master's hand tightened on his weapon, and in the roar of the burning Oathbreaker, he made his choice. The Oathbreaker groaned like a wounded beast. Fire roared through its decks. The Vox channels screamed with calls for aid, reports of breaches, and the endless thunder of alarms. The War Master stood at the decision point. Blade in hand, Corrin's voice still ringing in his ears. He turned from the retreating attackers. "Seal the breach," he ordered. His voice was cold iron. "The Oathbreaker lives." Corrin moved without hesitation, signaling crews, locking blast doors, cutting off whole decks to choke the flames. The sound of explosions dulled as bulkheads slammed into place. The traitor had slipped away, but the heart of the pact would endure. Hours passed before the fire was finally contained. The Oathbreaker drifted in the void, its engines crippled but intact, its hull scorched but unbroken. Crews worked in grim silence, repairing what they could. The War Master walked the damaged decks in person. Everywhere he passed, warriors bowed their heads, but not all with loyalty, some with fear, some with doubt. The shadows of Vokar's death still lingered. The whispers had grown teeth. In the Strategium, the remaining high captains gathered. Corrin stood at the War Master's side, his armor still bearing the soot of battle. The Jackal leaned against the edge of the hololith table, his smile thin, eyes glinting. "The enemy struck at our heart," Corrin said. "They planted charges, brought their blades aboard. That means one thing. Someone here opened the way." A low murmur rippled through the chamber. Captain Karos stepped forward, his voice edged with challenge. "And how long will we pretend not to know? First Vokar, now this. If the traitor remains, we bleed ourselves dry." The War Master's gaze cut to him. "You think I do not hunt them?" Karos did not flinch. "I think you hunt too slowly." The Jackal's smile widened. Perhaps he is not hunting at all. Perhaps he is watching to see who dies first. The chamber turned cold. The War Master's voice was calm, but it carried the weight of judgment. "The pact does not break because cowards lose their nerve. You want to accuse me? Speak your claim." Karos hesitated, but said nothing more. The War Master's eyes swept the chamber. "We press forward. Repairs continue. The next strike will fall not on us, but on the enemy." His tone was final. But as the captains left, the Jackal's whisper found the War Master alone. "You saved the ship," he said, almost admiring, "but you let the shadow escape." The War Master's voice was low. "They will not escape forever." The Jackal's smile did not fade. "Number, but how many more will bleed before they are cornered?" 2 days later, the bleeding began again. On the Crimson Vow, one of the Pact's strike cruisers, the crew turned on their officers mid-shift. A mutiny erupted without warning, spreading deck to deck in a storm of bolter fire and close-quarter slaughter. The Crimson Vow burned before the War Master could intervene. On the Iron Fang, another captain was found dead in his quarters. His body untouched, but his mind burned out by something darker than blade or poison. The War Master stood over the corpse, Corrin at his side. "This is not war," Corrin said grimly. "This is infection." The War Master's gaze was like stone, and an infection must be cut out before it kills the host. By the end of the week, the Pact's fleet was fractured. Ships still sailed under the War Master's banner, but unity had cracked. Every captain looked on the others with suspicion. Every crew whispered of who would be next, and in the silence between battles, the traitor's hand moved freely. One night, deep in the shadowed corridors of the Oathbreaker, the War Master found himself walking alone. He had dismissed his guards, sent Corrin to oversee the watch. It was then he felt it, the same presence he had sensed on Deck 3, the same cold weight in the air, the same silence that was not silence at all. He turned a corner and saw her. Sareth stood in the dim light, her chains coiled at her feet. "My war master," she said softly. His hand did not leave his blade. "You walk where shadows gather." Her eyes glimmered faintly. "Shadows are where truth hides. You know this. You've always known." The war master's voice was steady. "Truth or treachery?" Her smile was faint, almost sad. "In this war, can you still tell the difference?" Before he could answer, the Vox screamed to life. "Mutiny aboard the Blood Tide's Wrath. Captain Karos declares the War Master unfit for command." The War Master's eyes narrowed. Sareth's smile deepened, almost imperceptibly. The shadow moves again. The Blood Tide's Wrath broke formation, its guns turning toward the Oathbreaker. The War Master stood on the command dais as alarms flared. Corin's voice roared over the chaos. "Orders, my War Master." The War Master's eyes burned. "Bring us about. We end this. Now." The Blood Tide's Wrath loomed in the void, its crimson hull gleaming against the black. Its guns, once turned against the enemies of the Pact, now track the Oathbreaker with predatory precision. On the command dais, the War Master stood unmoving. "Open a channel," he ordered. Corin's fingers moved across the console. "Channel open, my War Master." The hollow display flickered, and Captain Karos's face filled the air. Eyes hard, jaw set. "My War Master," Karos said, the title heavy with contempt. "I declare you unfit to lead. The Pact bleeds, our brothers turn on each other, and you sit in your throne, hunting ghosts while our enemies close in." The War Master's voice was low, cold. "And your solution is to turn your guns on your own?" Karos's tone sharpened. "Better to end one corrupted command than watch the Pact die from rot." The War Master's gaze did not waver. "You call this loyalty?" Karos's reply was steel. "I call it survival." The channel cut. A moment later, the Blood Tide's Wrath fired. Bolter rounds screamed across the void, slamming into the Oathbreaker's forward shields. The ship shuddered under the impact, claxons blaring. Corin's voice was a roar over the noise. "Shields, holding. For now." The War Master's voice was iron. "Return fire. Disable, not destroy. I will have Karos alive." The Oathbreaker's guns lit the void, pounding the Blood Tide's Wrath. In the Strategium, the Jackal's voice cut through the chaos. "My War Master, the other ships are watching. They will choose a side before this battle is done." The War Master's gaze flicked to the fleet display. He could see it, ships hesitating, formations loosening. Some drifted closer to the Oathbreaker, others edged nearer to Karos's position. The traitor's work was complete. The Pact was no longer one blade. It was two, and the edges were turning inward. The Blood Tide's Wrath turned hard, its guns shifting to rake across the Oathbreaker's starboard. The shields flared, flickered. "Boarding party's ready," Corin called. "Give the order, and we take the fight to him." The War Master's voice was steady. "Prepare the Oathbreaker's first strike company. I will lead them." The Jackal's grin widened. "Ah, personal intervention. Always so dramatic." The War Master's eyes burned. "This ends today." And the boarding barges launched, cutting through void fire. The War Master stood at the head of the first, his armor scarred but unbroken, his blade ready. As they pierced the Blood Tide's Wrath, the decks erupted into chaos. Karos's loyalists fought with desperation. Blood Pact warriors clashed with each other in corridors once filled with victory oaths. The War Master cut his way toward the command deck. Every step was marked with the clash of steel, the scream of dying men. the echo of betrayal in every strike. At the command deck, Karos awaited him. The captain stood in full armor, his weapon ready, his eyes burning with conviction. "You should have stepped down," Karos said. "You should have let someone else lead." The War Master stepped forward, his blade lowering into guard. "And you should have remembered your oath." Karos's laugh was bitter. "I remember it well. It was to the Pact, not to you." The clash came hard. Karos fought with speed and fury, his strikes driven by a captain's desperation. The War Master met him with precision, every block and counter measured, inevitable. Their blades rang like war drums, the sound carrying across the deck. Around them, Karos's loyalists faltered. Some laid down arms, others fought harder, unwilling to surrender. At last, the War Master broke through Karos's guard. His blade rested at the captain's throat. Karos's breath was ragged, but his eyes were unbroken. "Kill me. It will not matter. The Pact is already dying." The War Master's voice was quiet. "It will matter to you." The blade struck. Karos fell. The War Master turned to the bridge crew. "The rebellion is ended. The Blood Tide's wrath returns to the Pact, or it burns." The crew bowed their heads, surrendering the ship. But even as the Blood Tide's wrath lowered its guns, the War Master's vox came alive. The Jackal's voice was low, edged with mockery. "My War Master, while you've been busy, 3 more ships have broken formation. They head into the Expanse, under new command." The War Master's jaw tightened. The traitor's hand had moved again, and this time it had taken half the Pact with it. The Oathbreaker returned to formation in silence. Karos's body lay aboard the Blood Tide's wrath, his rebellion cut short. But the silence that followed was not victory. It was the silence of a blade balanced on the edge of breaking. Half the fleet still held formation. The other half was gone, vanished into the darkness of the Expanse. The War Master stood in the Strategium, the hololith projecting the fractured fleet before him. Corrin's voice was grim. 3 ships lost. The Crimson Oath, the Veilbreaker, and the Black Fang. They head toward the deep systems. We do not know their destination. The Jackal's smile was faint. "We know their destination, away from you." Corrin's eyes burned toward him. "You speak as if you know more." The Jackal tilted his head. "I always know more. It's simply a question of whether you want to hear it." The War Master's voice cut through them both. "They do not flee without guidance. Someone leads them. The traitor moves openly now." The choice lay before him. Pursue the breakaway fleet into the Expanse, risk leaving the core of the Pact leaderless, vulnerable to further fracture, or hold position, secure what remained of his strength, and let the breakaway ships vanish deeper, where their return would be an even greater threat. The War Master's hand rested on the edge of the hololith. The stars beneath his fingers shifted like sand. "Which would you choose, my War Master?" the Jackal asked softly. The War Master's eyes burned. "I do not choose between losing one arm or the other. I choose to cut off the hand that guides the knife." Orders went out. The Oathbreaker would split its strength. Half the remaining ships would hold position in the contested systems, securing the Pact's base of power. The War Master would take the Oathbreaker and 2 loyal escorts into the Expanse, pursuing the breakaway fleet directly. It was a gamble, one the Pact could not afford to lose. As the Oathbreaker prepared to make the jump, Corrin stood with the War Master at the command dais. "You divide what's left," Corrin said. "If you fail, there will be nothing to return to." The Warmaster's voice was steel. If I do not move, there will be nothing left at all. Corin's jaw tightened, but he gave a sharp nod. The Oathbreaker entered the expanse. The void beyond was silent, uncharted. The stars were thin here, dim points of light swallowed by endless black. The trail of the breakaway ships glimmered faintly on auger sweeps, faint warp traces like footprints in ash. They led deeper into the dark. Days passed. The void pressed closer. The Oathbreaker's crew grew tense. In the mess decks, whispers returned. Not of Vokar, not of Karos, but of something older. A presence that followed them. On the 6th day, the augurs picked up faint energy signatures. The Veilbreaker. Its lights were dead, its engines cold. It drifted, silent, in the black. Corin's voice was wary. No life signs, no power, no movement. The Jackal's smile was almost amused. How curious. A ship flees, only to wait in silence for its pursuer. Almost an invitation. The Warmaster's voice was firm. Prepare boarding parties. We see what waits inside. The Veilbreaker's decks were dark. The Warmaster led the first strike team through its silent corridors. There were no bodies, no signs of battle, only the empty echo of a ship abandoned in haste or in fear. In the command deck, the thrones were empty, and carved into the wall in deep gouges were words in a hand the Warmaster recognized. The pact bleeds because you let it. Corin's breath was sharp. Karos. The Warmaster's gaze was cold. Karos is dead. This is another hand. The Jackal's voice from the Vox was edged with satisfaction. Perhaps the hand you seek is closer than you think. As they returned to the Oathbreaker, the augurs screamed warning. The Black Fang and the Crimson Oath emerged from the void ahead, their guns already turning toward the Oathbreaker. Corin's voice roared over the alarms. They were waiting for us. The Warmaster's eyes narrowed. The traitor had set the trap. The Oathbreaker's guns came to life, shields flaring as enemy fire raked its hull. The escorts moved to intercept, but the breakaway ships pressed the attack with precision. This was no desperate rebellion. This was war. And at the heart of it, the Warmaster knew. The traitor was closer than ever. The void exploded in fire. The Black Fang and the Crimson Oath surged forward, their guns flashing like burning suns. Each volley slammed into the Oathbreaker's shields, the shock reverberating through the decks. Corin's voice thundered over the chaos. Shields at 60%, starboard batteries returning fire. The Warmaster stood at the center of the command dais, his voice steady as iron. Target the Black Fang's engines, cripple it. We will deal with the Crimson Oath next. The Jackal leaned lazily against the tactical rail, his grin infuriatingly calm. Such confidence, my Warmaster. I almost hope you're wrong. The Warmaster ignored him. The Oathbreaker's guns roared. Lances of fire tore across the void, striking the Black Fang's aft. Explosions rippled along its hull as one of its engines burned out. But the Crimson Oath pressed harder, swinging wide to rake the Oathbreaker's flank. Secondary shields failing, Corin shouted. If they punch through, they will not. The Warmaster cut in. Helm, roll the Oathbreaker. Present dorsal armor to their guns. Fire all batteries. The Oathbreaker moved, its massive frame turning with surprising speed. Its guns thundered, again hammering the Crimson Oath. Then the blow came from within. A deep explosion tore through the lower decks. Red warning sigils flared across the hololith. Corin's voice was sharp. In Internal detonation. Deck 6. Fire teams moving to contain. The Jackal's voice was almost a purr. How interesting. The enemy outside, the enemy inside. Which one will you kill first, my War Master? The War Master's jaw tightened. The traitor had struck again. In the chaos, the Vox came alive with a voice that froze the deck. It was Sareth. My War Master, she said softly, her tone like a knife through silk. The pact has bled enough. It ends here. You will not survive this battle. Corrin's head snapped toward the Vox console. She's aboard the Oathbreaker. The War Master's voice was ice. Where? The Vox crackled again. Closer than you think. Another explosion rocked the ship. Corrin's voice was hard. She's moving toward the reactor. She means to take the Oathbreaker with her. The War Master turned to the helm. Continue engagement. Hold the enemy at range. I will deal with Sareth myself. The Jackal's smile curved faintly. Ah, now the game is truly fun. The War Master moved through the smoke-filled corridors, each step steady despite the chaos. He passed fire teams battling to contain the blazes, medici dragging the wounded, warriors still fighting boarding parties in the darkened decks. The traitor's work was everywhere. He reached the reactor deck. Sareth stood there, her chains uncoiled, their ends tipped with blades, each one humming faintly with the taint of the warp. Around her, dead warriors lay where they had fallen. None had touched her. My War Master, she said softly, her voice almost tender. You should have killed me long ago. The War Master's voice was cold. You betrayed the pact. Sareth's smile was faint, almost sad. The pact was never yours to keep. It belonged to the fire, and the fire always consumes. She moved, chains whipping forward. The War Master met her attack head-on. Steel rang against steel, chains sparking as they wrapped around his blade, testing his strength. Her speed was inhuman, each strike aimed to kill. The War Master pressed forward, each blow heavier than the last, forcing her back step by step toward the reactor's core. You think killing me will save them? She hissed, her voice echoing with something beyond mortal. The pact was broken the day you took command. I simply finished the work. The War Master's blade cut through one of her chains, sparks showering the deck. You finished nothing, he said. Her eyes glimmered. Then finish me, War Master, and see what remains when the smoke clears. The fight ended in a single, final strike. The War Master's blade pierced her chest. Sareth's chains fell still. Her smile lingered, faint but unbroken, as she sank to her knees. Too late, she whispered. Much too late. She fell, her body collapsing into the shadows as if swallowed by the void itself. The War Master turned back toward the command deck. Corrin's voice crackled over the Vox. The Black Fang is crippled. The Crimson Oath is breaking off. The War Master's voice was steady. Hold position. Secure the Oathbreaker. We end this here. On the hololith, the Crimson Oath turned and vanished into the expanse. The Black Fang, crippled, drifted powerless. The battle was over, but the cost was plain. Half the pact was gone. The traitor lay dead, but her words lingered. Much too late. The War Master stood on the command dais, the silence of the void heavy beyond the walls. The pact still lived, but only barely. The Oathbreaker limped home. Its hull was scarred, its engines battered, its banners tattered from battle. The black of the expanse faded behind it, but the silence of the return was heavier than the void itself. Of the fleet that had once answered the War Master's call, only a fraction sailed beside him. The rest were gone, shattered in rebellion, lost to the traitor's schemes, or vanished into the deep dark, never to return. The War Master stood on the command dais, watching the broken ships hold formation, each one a ghost of what the Pact had been. When they entered the Pact's stronghold systems, there was no roar of welcome. The stations burned dim, repairs half-finished, their decks thinly manned. Corrin stood at the War Master's side. His armor was dented, his voice heavy. "The Pact holds, my War Master, but it is not what it was." The War Master's gaze stayed fixed on the view. It will never be what it was. In the days that followed, the War Master met with what remained of the Pact's high captains. The council chamber was a shadow of its former power. Half the thrones were empty. The jackal sat idly near the back, his grin faint, his eyes sharp. "You stand," he said softly, "but the blade in your hand is broken. Will you still call it a weapon?" The War Master's voice was quiet but unyielding. "Even a broken blade cuts." The jackal tilted his head. "At what cost?" The War Master did not answer. In private, Corrin spoke with him. "You've brought them home," Corrin said. "They still follow you, but for how long? They are tired, wounded. They've lost brothers, ships, worlds." The War Master's voice was steady. "So have I." Corrin hesitated, then asked the question that had lingered since the first betrayal. Was it worth it? The War Master looked at him, and for the first time, there was no iron in his voice, only truth. "I don't know." Repairs began. The ships that remained were refitted, their banners cleaned of battle scorch. But in the mess decks, the silence persisted. The names of the dead were carved into steel: Vokar, Karos, Sarith, and countless others. The War Master walked the decks in silence, reading each name, committing them to memory. The Pact still lived, but its heart was a scar. On the final night before the Pact's next campaign, the War Master stood alone on the observation deck of the Oathbreaker. The stars burned cold beyond the void glass. Somewhere out there, the traitor's remnants still moved. Ships still loyal to other oaths, to other promises. The War Master's reflection stared back at him in the glass. A man who had won nothing and lost everything. And the jackal's voice came from the shadows. "You saved what you could," he said, almost softly. "That is all a commander can ever do." The War Master did not turn. "I was supposed to save them all." The jackal's smile was faint. "No one saves them all. That is the first truth of command." The War Master's gaze remained on the stars. "And the second?" The jackal's eyes glimmered in the dark. "The second is that the ones you save will never forget the ones you didn't." Silence fell between them. Beyond the glass, a dying star flickered on the edge of sight. Its light faint, its life almost gone. The War Master watched it until it vanished, swallowed by the dark. The Oathbreaker prepared to sail again. The Blood Pact would fight again, but it would never be the same. The War Master stood at the head of his battered fleet, his voice steady as he gave the only order that mattered. "Set course. We march." And in the silence of the void, the Pact moved forward, broken but unbowed.